There we go.
All right.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are going to give everyone a couple of minutes to get logged on, and I am going to apologize in advance for my background. I am in my baby's nursery, so you can tell by the background. But with that, we'll give everyone just a couple of minutes to log on, and then I'm going to go ahead and get the slides pulled up. Awesome. Tim, can you all see this okay?
Yes, I can totally see it.
Wonderful. And I can't see the chat, so if you are able to see and just make sure everyone else can see the screen, that'd be great.
If you can't see Brooke's screen, jump in the chat and chat, please.
Awesome. All right, since we are at the top of the hour, we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our course, Fees This Way. We're going to go Fees Your Way, excuse me. We're going to jump right into some housekeeping items, specifically regarding ASHA CEUs and PDHs. So if you are wanting ASHA CEUs, we do ask that you complete the survey for this presentation in its entirety by next week, 6/19. And that just allows us to get in ASHA CEU reporting. And we did fix our survey. So if you're on our last webinar, thanks for bearing with us. We've made it a lot easier this time. We will pop the survey link into the chat during the course of this webinar, and it's also available on our website. If you go to the Timms University page and scroll down to this course, you can click right on it. But we will be sending out an email via or an email after this course concludes with the link to the survey. If you didn't opt in for the email, don't worry. Like I said, you could still access it in the chat or via our website. And then just make sure that you include all personal information for ASHA purposes. So we do unfortunately need everyone's full address. So just make sure that's in there. That helps us speed up the process with reporting. And then if you'd like a certificate of completion for your records, if you don't use the CE registry or you want PDHs, just send us an email at tims-univ@tims.com. Just because of the high number of requests we get, we just do them on a by request basis. So just send us an email at that email address. And then we do have the Q&A section at the end of this webinar. But if you have questions along the way, this is super laid back. So feel free to pop your questions into the chat as we go, and Tim and I will feel free to answer those in the chat or live as well. So here are our course objectives and the course timeline. A quick introduction. My name is Brooke Bielman with a recent name change to Brooke McGivern because I recently got married. I am the Director of Marketing and Communication here at Timms Medical and a practicing speech language pathologist locally here in the state of Iowa. And I'll pass it over to Tim Lazon to introduce himself. Tim?
All right. Yeah, nice meeting you all. My name's Tim Lazon. I'm our Director of Product Marketing here at Timms Medical. I've been with the company a little over 11 years, and I didn't have a name change, but I did have a beard change since this picture, obviously. And I didn't get married, but I'm turning into a farmer. So I'm starting a new chapter in my life here, right? Almost in the next week or so. So thanks everybody for joining.
So a couple of disclosures before we kick things off. Obviously, Tim and I both work full-time for Timms Medical, and we receive a salary from Timms Medical. Additionally, I also receive a salary from the University of Iowa, Maryville University, and Mercy Medical Center, and neither of us have any non-financial disclosures for this course. So a few key points before getting started. Our main objective this evening is that you will leave with an improved understanding of ways to customize your fees program, including an increased understanding of currently available fees equipment on the market. We additionally hope that this will help you improve your understanding of what to consider when thinking about your team's needs. And we hope that you will be able to demonstrate the return on investment for the development or advancement of your fees program. Finally, we do want to mention that this course discusses the use of Timms MVP software for fees, but we will also be discussing, as I mentioned, all of the fees equipment currently available on the market, including equipment from Patcom Medical, Atmos, Ambu, Optum, Olympus, Karl Storz, and Pentax. And we wanted to mention that Tim's Medical does have a reciprocal business relationship with Patcom Medical, Atmos, and Optum. And finally, we want to mention that we did reach out to every company that is discussed in this presentation. However, not all organizations responded. So if there's scopes or equipment that we don't have quite as much information on, we recommend reaching out to the companies directly. Okay, so jumping right in, we want to go ahead and just provide a quick overview of fees. As you all are probably well aware, fees has gone by a couple of different names over the years, but most recently it seems to be most commonly referred to as flexible endoscopic evaluation of swallowing. It was created in 1988 by Dr. Susan Langmore for the evaluation of swallow function. We know that fees is a gold standard option to determine the presence and severity of dysphagia. We know that fees is sensitive, predictive, practical, and provides valuable information for both analysis and treatment planning, and it is safe, well tolerated, and helps improve patient outcomes. There are, as you can probably all attest, many benefits of fees, including the fact that there are no time restraints. You can perform fees almost just about anywhere. There's zero exposure to radiation. You can use regular or preferred foods and liquids, which especially now when more people have dietary restrictions and allergies, I think this is a huge benefit. Of course, fees allows us to assess secretion management. There are no pauses in recording as we experience with the performance of video fluoroscopy. We have direct visualization of the upper airway as well as vocal fold movement. So there are tons of benefits of fees. So this is probably a review for most people, but just a quick review about what equipment you need when you are thinking about developing a fees program. So we need fees specific equipment, of course, a camera, processor, light source, microphone. We need to ensure that we have recording capability and software so that we can actually record what we're seeing and then go back and review it and archive it. We need a monitor to view it on, and then depending upon your setting, you may need a cart, and you can customize that cart based on what setting you're in. Additional items, of course, include food coloring, which could be green, blue, or white, depending upon your clinical preference. You may use a water-based lubricant. Again, this is clinician preference. And then your team may consider the use of a nasal decongestant and or a topical anesthetic. And again, this is if indicated and clinician preference. In terms of what we're bringing to the bedside or to a patient's home or whatever setting you're in, that's really going to be dependent upon the patient diagnosis and other considerations, but typically we'll have ice chips, various food items, and various liquid items, and then of course, personal protective equipment. So next we want to dive into considerations when you are thinking about starting a fees program or maybe making changes to your fees program. So when creating a fees program, an important aspect to consider is scope reprocessing. Each location will have different requirements. For example, a private practice or a mobile fees business may look different than a fees program in the acute care setting. Understanding your location's needs is critical prior to moving forward with equipment decision-making. In fact, your facility's reprocessing requirements may actually steer you in different directions, such as the consideration of a reusable scope compared to single-use options. So it's really important that before making any purchasing decisions that we're aware of what those regulations and requirements are. For example, many times in the hospital setting, the SLP department will work directly with sterilized processing or SPD. You may have heard of that department before, but this department is skilled in reprocessing endoscopes. However, it's critical, in my opinion, that we as SLPs are really supporting SPD training and fees scope reprocessing because the scopes that SPD are typically reprocessing are not quite as fragile as the scopes we are utilizing for fees. Therefore, it's critical that anyone that's handling the fees scopes are familiar with how to handle the scope and how to reprocess it. Additionally, each scope has specific reprocessing requirements. So maybe you used a Pentax in the past and now you're using an Atmos. Those reprocessing steps may look a little bit different. So it's really important that we are understanding our locations requirements, but also scope specific requirements for reprocessing. When considering which scope to purchase, it's really important to understand what those steps look like so we know whether or not we are going to be able to purchase that item. If you will be working with SPD, you want to work and collaborate with them regarding reprocessing schedules and responsibilities. So for example, based on hospital policies, you may be required to document who is handling the scopes, when, with which patient, who completed the initial step in wiping the scope down after removal from the patient, and what time it was transported to SPD. And then when working with SPD, it's important to understand scope reprocessing turnaround times. So this will help your team determine how many scopes you might want to budget for. For example, if you are estimating that you're performing anywhere from 4 to 6 fees a day, and SPD is only able to reprocess scopes within 24 hours, you'll want to take that into consideration so you can ensure that you have the correct number of scopes on hand at all times. Additionally, you may also consider implementing some form of reprocessing competency training for both the SLP team members working with SPD and SPD team members themselves. This will help make sure that everyone is on the same page and will aim to reduce scope damage. Another option for scope reprocessing is high-level disinfectant or HLD. So if you take a look at this photo here on the left-hand side, this is just an example of one such product that can be used in high-level disinfectant. I've seen this commonly used in the private practice and mobile fees settings. So Revitalox is just one of the products that can be used. Another product I typically see utilizes Sidex. However, again, it's really crucial that you're working with the scope manufacturers to determine and understand which products can be used with which scopes. Reprocessing time when using high-level disinfectant is typically pretty fast, and you do want to work with those scope manufacturers directly to understand what exactly that process looks like. However, most scopes are recommended to be cleaned with a sponge right after the fees performance is completed to remove any secretions, and then additional steps may be specific to each scope, but you're typically going to have a soaking period with the high-level disinfectant, and that duration will really depend on the product that you're using. So for example, the soak time for Revitalox is different than Sidex. So again, it's really important that we're aware of those. And then you'll follow it with rinsing the scope with water. The manufacturers can provide you with more information about this, but it's important to note that water can occasionally leave film on the scope tip, specifically tap water. Therefore, you may consider rinsing your scope with filtered water. However, again, we recommend working directly with the scope manufacturers for those specifics. And then finally, you want to consider transportation and storage. So on the slide, I have an example of one such storage option, the caddy here in the middle. This is bolted to the wall typically, and it keeps the scope in that nice upright position. So many scope companies will provide you options with storage, such as this caddy or a mobile carrying case or stand. And it's really important that we are considering how we're storing the scopes, because we want to ensure that we're reducing the risk of scope damage by storing it appropriately. And then finally, when you're transporting the scope, you want to consider how you are transporting it. So if you're in the hospital setting, you're typically going to have some form of cart, but you want to make sure you have something on the cart to actually transport the scope with, so that it's in a sterile environment. And then after you're done with performing your fees, that you're putting it in something where it's again in its isolated box prior to transportation for reprocessing. So I have an example here on the right-hand side of these just disposable bins that are nice. They help delineate whether the scope is clean or soiled. So, these can be something that you might consider whether you're working in the hospital setting, or maybe even if you're in the mobile fees or private practice setting and you are moving scopes around for reprocessing purposes. So now we will talk more about what setup is best for your team. Ultimately, it's important that the team comes to a consensus about what your top priorities are. To help you in this process, we have created a fees equipment decision-making document, which can be downloaded for free on our website. And if you want the direct link, just send us an email or comment on our most recent Instagram post and we can DM that to you. But we did create that so that you can sit down with your team and kind of delineate what is most important to you. On this slide, we have numerous demonstrations of customized fees programs from clinics around the country. As you can see, there are a variety of options available, including the quote-unquote traditional setups with companies such as Karl Storz, Olympus, and Pentax, single-use options such as Ambu, which includes the monitor, and the software, which those of course are reusable, but the scopes are disposable. And finally, we also have examples of the newest generation of USB plug and play scopes, which come from Patcom Medical, Atmos, and Optum. So you can see here, even just between the, the different carts, kind of what these setups can be customized to look like. So these are our USB options, and then we've got our disposable scopes, and then our more traditional stacks, if you will. So all ways that we can customize these programs. So now we're going to dive into specific program considerations. So here are some aspects that you may want to consider when considering how to best meet your team's needs. Number one, in my opinion, really is caseload size. So looking at your current caseload and determining, how many patients are we seeing on a daily basis that have dysphagia that could benefit from a FEES, but then taking it a step further and thinking, okay, I've got this number, but if I had FEES already in my repertoire, how many more patients could we be seeing? Are there other patient populations that could benefit from this study? So, it's just really thinking about our current caseload, but then also how can we grow in this area to demonstrate the return on investment. The next thing to consider is the SLP team size. So how many people are on the team right now? Are we looking to add more people to the team? But additionally, how many people on the team are planning on becoming FEES competent or are already FEES competent? We already discussed this, but scope reprocessing. So it's important to think about reprocessing versus single use. And again, that'll be site specific based on what your requirements are. You may be steered in one direction or another, depending upon those requirements. And of course, budget. We would all love to have an unlimited budget, but of course, that's not typically the case. So it's important that we are aware of the budget that we need to stay within. So I recommend when you're trying to develop a program or maybe advocate for new tools that you have kind of your bucket dream wish list set up, and you know what those price points are, and you can advocate for those and then see what funds you're able to come up with. Next is ideal workflows. So thinking about how you want to perform FEES. Will it be one SLP performing the FEES every time? Will there be two SLPs that are performing the FEES? And then from there, how are you planning on recording, archiving, editing, reviewing your studies? Will you be doing it right on the cart? Or are you going to optimize your equipment by sending them to another computer where you can then optimize your equipment and see more patients in the day? What does that look like? Are you wanting to integrate the images and the videos into your EMR? All of those things are important to keep in mind when you're determining your ideal workflow. Image quality, of course, is absolutely crucial when we are performing FEES. It's important that we are able to get clear image quality so we truly understand what's going on with our patient. So when you are looking at different scopes and demoing different scopes, it's important to keep in mind the image quality. And we already discussed recording, editing, and archiving, but it is, again, just important to note that those things can impact our efficiency and our workflow, our productivity, and our ability to implement standards in the performance of FEES. But then that last piece about archiving is critical, and we'll dive into that a little bit later on this evening. But just really considering how we are going to get this information across to the interdisciplinary team and how we will increase patient access to this information. We discussed a little bit cart functionality, but depending upon your setting, you may want to customize your cart based on your team needs. So in the photo here on the right, you can see an example from the University of Maryland. They have a TIMS with the Olympus CV190. So that cart's a little bit bigger than some of the carts we saw on the other screen. So again, just things to consider. What's most important to you, and how can I customize this to meet my team needs? We always recommend that you consider customer service and support. It's obviously a really important aspect when you're considering adding any kind of technology to your clinical practice. You want to make sure that the company you're working with is responsive and they're going to be able to help you, because there's no worse feeling than being with a patient and having something go wrong and not being able to get that support that you need. So we always recommend looking at that as a consideration. And kind of along that same line are the scope loaner programs. So thinking about and investigating which companies do have scope loaner programs, and this is specific to those reusable scopes. So, when we are reusing scopes, of course, there is the risk that something might go wrong at some point and need repair. So if that happens, does the company have an option for a loaner scope to be sent out to your team while your scope is being prepared? Additionally, you want to consider product warranty. Does the scope have and the equipment have warranty? And if so, how long? And then where is the equipment manufactured? So this is something to consider, especially if you are thinking about just starting a fees program, asking about where the scope is manufactured and what those wait times look like, because that can, where it's manufactured can impact the wait times. But then additionally, when you're thinking about if my product ever needs repair, how long might those wait times be? And you can ask those questions as well when you're, looking into purchasing the equipment. And then finally, training and competency, which we touched on a little bit earlier, but within Tim's Medical, we are often asked about fees program development. And this is a big one that comes up because if programs are just getting started, a lot of times the teams need training and competency. So thinking through that, and if everyone on the team does need training and competency, maybe considering looking at those options and what the cost and price points are, so you can kind of bundle that into your request for budget. So as of June of 2024, when we are recording this presentation, these are the currently available options for fees equipment. So you are able to purchase fees equipment from PATCOM Medical, Atmos, Ambu, Optum, GEDMed, Pentax Medical, Olympus, and Karl Storz. And how we have these kind of broken down this evening is into 3 categories, which I am going to dive into right now. So first we have our plug and play USB scope option, which are the next generation new scopes with HD image quality. These scopes are honestly changing the game for fees because they are allowing us as clinicians to access really high image quality at a more affordable price point. And additionally, they are extremely mobile. So you can hook these scopes up, like I said, via USB to a laptop and put it on a cart and off you go through the hospital, or you can use them in the mobile fees or private practice setting. So they're really quite functional. And like I said, they have great image quality, which you can see on the right-hand side, a couple of example photos from PATCOM, Atmos, and Optum. And the options currently are from, as I mentioned, PATCOM, Atmos, Optum, and GEDMed also has a USB plug and play scope, which Tim will dive into in a little bit. Additionally, we've talked a little bit about single-use scope options this evening already. So the benefits of single-use scopes, of course, it eliminates the concern for scope reprocessing. So this is a huge win for anyone that has those requirements or concerns. They are extremely portable, of course, and there's no concern for scope deterioration. So what that means is you're not, worried about scope repair or anything like that as you are reprocessing the scope, because there's no reprocessing. You're just throwing it away as soon as you're done with it. So you are additionally eliminating those scope reprocessing wait times, and they can be extremely cost effective depending upon your specific program. So on the right-hand side, we just have an example of Ambu and Tim's MVP, but there are several different options on the market, including options from Ambu, Olympus, and Karl Storz. And then finally, we have our quote unquote traditional stacks, which are typically have extremely high resolution image quality. And you all are probably pretty familiar with these companies, including options from Olympus, Karl Storz, and Pentax. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tim, and he is going to talk a little bit more about scope specs and information, as well as specific information about each of the scope categories that I just talked about. So I'll pass it over to you, Tim.
Fabulous. Thanks, Brooke. That was awesome. Let me share my screen here and go into present mode. I do feel like I should probably clarify something as well. I'm not leaving Tim's Medical to become a farmer. I'm just in the process of moving to Maine and adding farming into my repertoire. So because I shout out to Marta, first of all. Marta, she's one of our early fees adopters who picked up the software and just ran with it and stuff too. I saw Marta's here, so I just want to say hi. Yeah, I know we probably have a mix of people here that know a lot about fees and maybe some just getting to know fees. So I wanted to start with some of the terminology that we'll be looking at over the the next bunch of scopes. So we compiled some of basically the specifications of a number of the scopes that are on the market right now. And, the intent here is just to have a very unbiased discussion about that across the board. So to get it going, I wanted to talk a little bit about distal chip. And distal chip is probably where it's one of the newer technologies, well, not super new, but certainly where things are headed, and kind of all the new scopes coming out on the market are distal chip. You'll also hear it referred to as chip on the tip. And literally the camera, as you can see, well, I have some, some images I just grabbed off the web, but the camera's right on the tip of the scope, right? So, and you can see there's also, in this case, representing a light source on the tip of the scope. So distal chip means there's a CMOS detector right on the very tip of the scope that can be of varying resolutions, which we'll see over the next couple of slides. But just wanted to give everybody a feel for distal chip and versus fiber optic, which has been a more traditional technology for FEES scopes, where you have a bundle of fiber optic fibers that run through the entire length of the scope, the working end of the scope. And then there's a camera on the back end of those fibers that are basically looking down those fibers through a lens at the end. And so fiber, is sort of on its way out, I would say. There's still a number of companies that are using fiber optic, but so you'll see a mix here as we walk through some of these cameras. And I should probably start my timer going so I don't go way over. Brooke, just nudge me if I'm going too slow. Some of the other terminology I want to cover as well, and we'll see all these specs as we go along through the presentation. Articulation, which means and it's represented in degrees. So how far does this tip articulate? So that allows you to look up and down as you're, entering, into the nasal cavity and down into the esophagus. You want to be able to see up and down, and this will give you a feel for the degrees that scope, the kind of flexibility that it affords you, as well as field of view and direction of view. So field of view, and I think this is a pretty important one, really. Field of view is really the angle, this angle right here. What kind of field of view do I have? How much can I see based on the lens and camera technology that's implemented? So you'll see they range, from 90 degrees to, much higher than that, as well as direction of view, which is pretty much zero, which means the direction of view is coming straight out. I realize this is a rigid scope, but it was the only graphic I could find that represented this well. So, so those are another couple, some other terminology we'll see as we go along. Depth of field, another important one. It just means, the range of which things will be in focus, and it's represented in millimeters. And it'll say, it's 5 millimeters to 50 millimeters. And so the more depth of field you have, the more you'll have in focus, and you won't have to worry about exactly positioning the scope somewhere. So most of these have a pretty close ranges of depth of field, but another thing to look at and be aware of. And then, of course, scope diameter. Where, the smaller diameter scopes ranging from 2-point-something millimeters, in the pediatric settings, you're going to use those scopes. You can reduce risk of trauma with, certain patients with smaller diameter scopes, and just obviously, like it says here, easier maneuverability, smaller anatomical structures. The larger diameters, if you're working mostly with an adult population, there's some advantage to larger diameter scopes in that you have a better image quality. They can have larger sensors in there, more illumination. So, and also they're a little more, they're less fragile, let's say, the larger diameter scopes. So we'll start off here, now that we know everything about endoscopes, with our first distal chip scope, as you can see here, from Patcom Medical. So Patcom's based up in Ontario. They've also got an office in New York, and they have a very nice high resolution. So there are a number of, we're right on the cusp. This is really actually a really good time to be looking at these scopes now, because a number of manufacturers are coming out with high definition distal chip scopes, and it's night and day from standard definition up to higher definition. So Patcom has one of the highest definition or highest resolution or broadest resolution scopes, I should say, distal chip scopes on the market right now. And they also have a unique LED on the tip. So their light source is literally right on the tip as well with LEDs. And as you can see, a fairly small diameter scope as well. So they're, in the low 3.2 millimeters. And here's that field of view number I was talking about. So 110 degrees there. So good field of view. And I'm not going to run through this with every single one of these, but just to walk through this first one here. So our depth of field, so 6 to 60 millimeters, and so that's a nice broad range depth of field as well. The articulation, so we talked about how far it can articulate up and down, 130 degrees, which is a pretty common. I'd say 130, 135 is roughly where a lot of these scopes land. It is USB, so pretty plug and play. You can plug it into a laptop with, our software or other software that will allow you to capture that image pretty readily. They have what's pretty popular for the speech world, this pistol grip handle. So you'll see she's holding it right here, literally looks like a pistol, and it's a nice comfortable grip. I would say we see more and more FEES specific scopes in that range or using that configuration. And I will say the other nice things about Patcom is they're quite focused on the speech market and dysphagia market. There are other manufacturers out there that are huge and trying to provide a huge broad range of scopes for ENT and GI and things like that. Patcom's pretty focused on the speech market, which I like personally. They do have a 1-year warranty, and they have a loaner program. So you send back if there's a scope that's damaged in some way, you send it back, and they'll send a replacement. So let's move along here. And here's some representative images, and these are tough to beat with a distal chip scope. So what you're looking for is, in this case, the resolution. So they have a nice broad resolution. So we saw it was like, what was it, 1280 by 720. So that's 1280 across by 720 pixels down. Well lit, evenly lit. These are great. So that's the kind of thing you're looking for there. And some of the other options that they provide. So this is the case or shipping case or carrying case that they provide for the scope that we just talked about. They also offer some traveling or mobile FEES configurations too that are made for kind of toting around if you're traveling SLP. And it's the same scope, but some other options along with it. And they offer some stroboscopy options too, a different scope, but they have some strobe head that can go prior to that strobe light source. Let's see, I lost my mouse there. There we go. So we'll move into Atmos, and Atmos is a company based in Germany. Another distal chip scope with so I'm just going to, going forward, sort of call out the highlights that are a little bit notable or different. Here we're looking at an 800 by 800 resolution. So it's going to give you a square basically cut out of that. Probably the sensor is larger than that, but they're cropping it basically to a square. And lower resolution like this doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be blurrier. It just means you probably have the same number of pixels per inch. It's the same kind of density and good clear imagery, but it's just not going to be as large of an image. All right, so we'll see that as we move forward. In this case, where previously the PATCOM had the light source right at the tip, so they have LEDs right in the tip of the scope. Here with the Atmos, and this is, I'd say, probably most of the other scopes we're looking at have LEDs in the handle in the scope, so in that pistol grip, and then they're using fiber optic cables to transmit that light out to the end. So they're not fiber optic scopes, they're just using fiber to transmit light. It's not recording or using that to capture the imagery. So I don't want to be, cause any confusion there. A little bit larger diameter, and you can see our field of view is cut down a bit. So 90 degrees, but still, totally respectable. Same depth of field, same articulation. We've got 2-year warranty here. They also do advanced replacement. They, like I say, they're based in Germany. It's manufactured in Germany. The Germans do a great job of, they have good, high quality products and good attention to detail. So, it's a good solid product across the board, I would say. And here's some sample images from the Atmos scope. So you can see it's cropped. I'm going to call it cropped, basically. So, I think you end up with the same kind of pixels per inch and same clarity in the image, but just a smaller image. So that'll give you an idea what that looks like. And the sample imagery is it's gonna vary from, these aren't all totally 100% representative. It's your patient, how far you are away from the anatomy and things like that in terms of the lighting and stuff. So Atmos is a pretty big company, and actually way more prominent worldwide than they are here in the United States. So they're, they have quite a few scopes here in the US, but they're predominantly their larger installed base around the world. So they do have quite a few other products. They're not just focused on fees only. They have, a whole like ENT. They can outfit an entire ENT department with software and things like that as well. So and they also provide some stroboscopy options too, if you're interested in that. Moving on to Optum. So Optum's based right in our backyard. So we're in Boston, outside Boston, in Chelmsford, Mass. They're a little further west in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, and so all their products are actually manufactured in the U.S. and repaired in the U.S., which is kind of nice. This current offering that they have available right now. This is our first fiber optic scope that we'll be looking at right now. So you can see. It's not a high def scope, so it's a standard definition. They call it 640 by 480 resolution. So it's a little bit lower res. Also LED in the handle, and they have 2 different scopes that are sort of catering to the fees market, and sort of a mid-size diameter scope for adult patients, but they also have a SD or like smaller diameter scope at 2.7, so good for pediatric settings. So if you have that need and you want to be able to kind of swap back and forth and get a couple different scopes, they can provide that. And I'll just take a second here to show the difference and kind of point out oops, I clicked and I shouldn't have clicked. I want to just my pointer here. This is the scope that has the fiber optic bundle coming down through it. The light source is here in the handle. You put batteries in here, and then there's a sort of an eyepiece here, so you can actually look down through the scope through that fiber optic bundle. But when you're using it for recording and connecting to USB, the camera actually sits out here. So in the PATCOM pistol grip scope we looked at, the camera was built right into that pistol grip. So here, this connects to the back of this, and we'll see that in a second. So it's a little bit different configuration. I'm going to call it more of an ENT style handle. So it's more where you're kind of holding it like so versus holding it like a pistol grip. So that's one of the differences there. Same kind of articulation, a little bit different with the SD versus the Entity XL, their adult patient scope. 2-year warranty. They have great, really solid advanced replacement programs and things like that. I was chatting with the folks from Optum a couple of days ago, and they did let me know that I could mention, here I'm clicking again, that they have a distal chip HD offering that is going to be available this fall. It's just going through FDA approval and stuff. So worth kind of keeping your eyes on to see, what that looks like once it hits the market. No, I don't have really any other specifics on it other than that, but I would assume it's going to fall into the range of some of the other HD distal chip scopes we've looked at and we're going to be looking at still. So here's some samples of the Optum imagery. You can see, the fiber optic, between being fiber optic and being 640/480 resolution, it's it's going to be a lower resolution. I mean, people have used this forever, until the distal chip scopes came out and making do with it. So it's still totally functional, but there's some, like I say, things are evolving, and definitely distal chip is where things are headed. Here's another kind of look at, well, this is the scope coupled together, gives you an idea what that looks like connected to a laptop. So they also offer some portable fees if you're traveling fees, and going out to SNFs or long-term care facilities is a great, between Optum, PACOM offers one as well, but it's nice to be able to pack it all up in a case and set up shop, somewhere out on the road. So that's great. GEDMED is a company also here in the U.S. Their scopes aren't manufactured here in the U.S. I think they're German-based scopes, but I don't know 100% because I've got question marks down there, so I don't really know. We don't work super closely with them. We know of them. We've tested, our products with them as well. They have a new distal chip scope, and you can see HD 800 by 800 LED in the handle. So it's, the light's traveling via fiber optic, a little bit larger diameter. And, you can download these notes afterwards and kind of, so I don't want to go through every single specification because I'll drive you guys crazy. But, most of the stuff is pretty close from scope to scope. So I just want to point out sort of the major differences between them. I don't have any sample imagery from that scope. I think it's relatively new. They're going to send us one, and we'll create some imagery and maybe get it up on our website so you guys can check it out. Ambu, this is our first, single-use scope or disposable scope that we're looking at here. It is distal chip. However, it's distal chip at standard definition or a lower resolution. So I'm assuming, the whole key to the single-use scopes obviously is keeping costs down. So I'm certain that they're just using lower cost parts there. And for single use, again, you're not trying to replace an Olympus stack with this. It's got its place. The single use scopes totally have their own use cases. I talked to some hospitals, worked with some folks that had an Olympus stack in their primary facility, but they had another, smaller, more rural facility that didn't do as many fee studies per day. So it made more sense to them to go with Ambu versus investing, $80,000 to $100,000 in an Olympus stack for that facility. So here you're paying per scope. So a little bit smaller field of view, medium diameter on this guy. Again, LED in the handle, so it's fiber out to the tip. Reasonable depth of field and things like that. So I really have, unfortunately, no idea on their warranty programs and things like that. I don't know if there's a warranty on disposable scopes, probably not. So, and same thing with loaner programs. I know that for a fact that they did just start a new plant in Mexico where they'll be manufacturing there. And again, for the right use case, it's, it totally has its place. Here's some sample imagery. You can see, it's a little softer, a little lower res, but depending on what you're going for, you're still going to see aspiration and things like that. you might not be able to make out some finer details, but they're great folks. We work with them. We have actually quite a few customers using the Ambu product, and they've been great. So this is what the scope sort of looks like overall. You're plugging this into, and I'll show you in a moment, they have a kind of a tablet that is their processor, basically. So it doesn't terminate in USB. So you do use a tablet that they provide to do actually capture the imagery, but otherwise it's pretty similar with a control lever to do your articulation and things like that. And this is kind of what this looks like. They have a cart that they supply, and there's their tablet, and they do zoom out that 400 by 400 to kind of fill a larger screen, so you have a little bit better view of the action. We've taken that same sort of concept and mounted it to one of our traditional carts and provide, the timSoftware doing the recording, and then so you have a larger even view of things there with our, it's like a 27-inch monitor. And we're going to take a turn here and head into the more traditional stacks. So Olympus, Pentax, Karl Storz. Let me just jump to some of my notes here because I had some talking points about that. You get what you pay for with a lot of the scopes. These cost 2 to 3 times literally more than what you would pay for some of the USB scopes we just covered. But they're a lot more flexible. They're designed to accommodate ENT, GI. There's a whole bunch of different scopes that you can plug in there. They've got different light sources, all kinds of different really options just kind of across the board. So it's not really a super fair comparison, but I will say for doing fees, and if you're just starting a program, it'd be a tough, it's tough as a speech department or rehab department budget to cough up the money for one of these guys. They're costly, but they are super nice. I mean, you're not going to be unhappy with it. Though the carts are a little bulky, so there's that. The imagery is beautiful. You're not going to get anything better than this, really. Although I will say, if you looked at this compared to that first PATCOM imagery, it's looking really good comparatively. With an Olympus stack here, we often find that the CV170 is what Olympus recommends for if you're doing fees. And so in this case, we kind of use their cart that they provide, and you can see if you want to use, if you're currently using TIMS for recording your modified barium swallow studies, you want to integrate that same workflow, we kind of plug right down into here, and you can borrow a stack from your ENT department. We'll integrate onto that. So totally easy to set up and get going. If you have access to one of these guys, I'd say go for it. And I think that's what I've got to talk about this afternoon, or this evening. So I'll hand it back to the two of us, Brooke, and I'll stop sharing and you can take control.
Awesome. We are coming up in the last just 10 minutes here. So we are almost to the end. If you all have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But we just wanted to quickly review some key terms to be familiar with if you are looking at starting a fees program. So the first being vendor neutral archive, also referred to as VNA. So VNA, if you're not familiar, is a medical imaging technology that stores medical images and data in a standardized format. It allows other systems to access the images in a vendor neutral way, regardless of the imaging devices or systems used to create them. The next terminology is picture archiving and communication system, or PACS. So if you're doing MBS. You've probably heard of PACS or VNA. Your hospital will have one or the other. But PACS is a digital image viewing hub that is used to retrieve and distribute medical images and reports electronically. So it's important for us to be aware of those terms and processes and teams so that we can work with those teams as we are thinking about archiving our FEES studies, where they will go, how they will be stored, et cetera. And then, of course, you all, I'm sure, are familiar with the electronic medical record, or EMR, but it's important to think about the EMR and how we can actually integrate our FEES studies into the EMR now, especially with advances in technology. Obviously, we talked a lot about scopes this evening, but the software is really important to consider as well, because as you all can probably attest from using, if you use various different EMRs, the EMR can really impact our productivity, our interdisciplinary collaboration, and just communication among the team. And so the software that you choose for your FEES can actually play a role in that EMR. So for example, with TIMS MVP, you can integrate your FEES studies with your EMR, making the imagery much more accessible.
Can I just interject there real quickly, Brooke?
Yeah.
What we've seen traditionally, both ENT departments or just endoscopy overall, GI and everything, they haven't traditionally really sent their imagery to PACS or VNA, and therefore it's not making its way to the EMR. But more and more, that's becoming a thing. So don't be afraid to ask or insist that your imagery your FEES imagery can be archived the way all the radiology imagery is.
Yes, and that's kind of actually leads into my next point about why software is important. So I'll talk about that now since we're on that topic. But the software that you select for your FEES, it does play a role in archiving, like Tim mentioned, because as you're working with your IT department, they're going to have certain potentially requirements for storage, and they may bring up the concern about file size. So software can actually allow you to reduce the size of your FEES or MBS studies to be in compliance with those IT requirements without impacting image quality. So it's really critical that we're thinking not only about, the performance and analysis of the study itself, but also how we're going to be storing that. Further, as you all can attest, we know from current research that frame by frame analysis is absolutely critical. Is absolutely critical when we are performing both MBS and FEES. We need to be able to go back and assess those minute things that we may miss when we are looking at a study in real time. Further, we know that recordings are medical documents, so it's really critical not only for that interdisciplinary collaboration, but also for patient empowerment. So we have patients moving around the country or maybe with progressive or chronic issues. A lot of times they want to actually access this information. So by considering that, when we are selecting software, we can think about how we can actually advocate for some of these capabilities that we didn't have in the past. So this is just a quick example of workflow. We talked a little bit about workflow earlier this evening. This is an example of the TIMS workflow specifically. So we've got the cart that I mentioned. This would be with a USB scope, and then our TIMS review software. So I can speak to this because I actually have a workflow like this in my own practice, but it's nice when you're able to send your study directly from your FEES cart off to your TIMS review station in your office so that other team members can take the FEES equipment and go out and see more patients. So you're optimizing your equipment. And when you're thinking about return on investment and advocating for budget, this can be a really nice way to do that because you're able to see more patients in a day. And then, of course, either from the cart or from your TIMS review, you can then send your study over to PACS. And as we mentioned, you can actually integrate the information into your EMR if you so wish to do so. So if you haven't already seen it, we have a lot of demo videos on our website showing how the TIMS MVP software can actually help you auto-populate some of what you're doing. So when you are doing your analysis in TIMS, you're taking snapshots, you're scoring maybe with digest FEES and other FEES specific ratings. All of that can be auto-populated into your report, which then can be pulled forward into your EMR along with those images that Tim mentioned. So it really just helps us to not only connect with our interdisciplinary team, but as we can all agree, a picture is worth 1,000 words. We can describe all we want, but then we can also refer to those snapshots that are then accessible in the EMR. So in closing this presentation, we just want to give you some key talking points about return on investment, or ROI, as well as price points. So when considering fees program development or program updates, it's important to consider each of the aspects that we have considered and discussed this evening. And as you begin this process, it's important to collect data about your current caseload needs and the approximation of how many more patients you could potentially see if you added fees to your program or updated your fees program. So when you're performing this analysis, you can then determine how many fees you would typically complete in a week, and then how many people on the team will be obtaining fees competency or are already competent. Further, it's important to think about how you perform the fees. Will there be one SLP performing independently, or will there be two always present? And then from here, you want to consider that reprocessing time to determine how many scopes that you want to either purchase right off the bat or add to your practice. And then in terms of price point, the cost to start or update a fees program really depends on what your team is wanting to obtain. So costs may include the scopes themselves, the software, the monitor, the cart, potentially depending upon your setting, mobile transportation options. And again, that's just dependent upon your setting, storage, disinfectant, and team training. So when you're wanting to demonstrate the return on investment, consider the number of patients you will be able to see in a day, the CPT codes that you will be utilizing associated with fees and dysphagia. And then further talking points include the improvements in efficiency that can come with an enhanced workflow, allowing you to see more patients in a day. And then finally, improve patient outcomes, faster discharge times, increase patient satisfaction scores, and increase patient safety and quality of care. So Tim touched briefly on price points for fees equipment specifically, and the cost truly is going to be determined by what equipment your team decides to purchase. So as he mentioned, you can purchase a really awesome USB scope with HD image quality for around the $30,000 price range, which includes pretty much everything you need to get started. But you can also purchase a really incredible traditional fees system with top-of-the-line imagery, more in that $60,000 to $100,000 range. So we really recommend that you reach out to all of the companies, you consider all these different options, and then make the decision that is best for your team. So in closing, really our goal with this presentation was to help you all improve your understanding of fees program development, customization, and increasing interdisciplinary collaboration. As we mentioned, how you design your program really can help foster improved communication amongst the interdisciplinary team. And ultimately, everything we do is about patient empowerment. By increasing our workflow processes as speech language pathologists, we can, have more time to actually spend with our patients, and we can increase their access to this important medical imagery. So with that, we hope that this presentation has given you the information to make informed purchases that are best suited for your team's specific needs. And we will go ahead and open up the floor for questions. Okay. So someone asked, can it be used on infants? So Tim mentioned there are a couple of scope options available for pediatric fees. PATCOM has a pediatric scope, Olympus, Optum. I'm trying to think who else. A lot of the companies do offer pediatric options. And so you can, reach out to each of the companies individually and see what options are available on the market. Again, you want to look at the image quality, because sometimes that can vary as well. But in my practice, I do have access to a pediatric scope through Olympus, and it has really great image quality. But like I said, I definitely know that PATCOM and Optum have pediatric scopes as well. Tim, do you know of anybody else that has pediatric options?
No, I think that's about you. I think you covered it.
Okay. Question was, can you take the unit into an isolation room for TB or COVID? So really, I would say any kind of, taking a fees cart into a specific unit is most likely going to be dependent upon your hospital requirements. But as everyone on this call can probably attest, if you were practicing during the pandemic, that's kind of why single-use scopes really became popular, because there's less concern for contamination. So that's where those scopes are really beautiful. You can use them and then just toss them. But typically most hospitals will have specific requirements about cleaning. So, for example, in my practice, we use scopes that are reusable, and we can take the carts into isolation rooms. We just have certain stipulation or regulations, I should say, on cleaning, but we do clean the cart every single time when we're going in and out of any room. So I hope that answers that question, but it's definitely worth investigating prior to making the purchase, understanding what cleaning looks like, both from a cart standpoint and your scope. The next question is, can a Karl Storz scope typically used with the stack be used with Tim's? Yes. So any scope that's available on the market can be used with Tim's, and how it is used with Tim's is specific to the scope itself. So a Karl Storz scope is a little bit different than a USB scope. A USB scope can plug directly into a laptop. So again, it's just all about the scope specifically and what it requires to work, if that makes sense. So if it requires a light source and a video source, the connection will be a little bit different. Let me go back real quick.
I mean, bottom line is we do totally connected Karl Storz scopes. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we were looking at these, pictures here, you can see this is a Karl Storz setup here. So we've got the Tim's box. If you've used Tim's before in MBS performance, you're probably familiar with the Tim's box. It's just a little bit of it can be a little bit of a different setup than like this USB option here with PATCOM. There's just a laptop here inside of this tray that the scope connects to. Same thing if you were to get the Atmos, which is right here, just plugs in right on the side.
Right. The Karl Storz has that essentially a big all-in-one, the computer's in the monitor, as you can see in that far left picture. And but we take the video out from any scope. Actually, we can connect to anything that has a video out. So really, we work with every single endoscope on the market.
And Sonia had a really great comment that some companies will give you contact names of SLPs or facilities that are using their equipment, so you can ask questions and get input. So yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's great to reach out to people in the field and see, people's perspectives. That's why we want to host this event tonight, so that, we could try to give an unbiased opinion, or unbiased information, excuse me, about all of the different equipment on the market, so that people can get a feel for what's available. Because, maybe if you've only seen Pentax before in your clinical practice, you're not familiar with some of these newer options, or, vice versa. So really just wanted to provide this information so that people can come back to this presentation and view it. And we will put the slides up on our website too. So if you want to download them, feel free to do so. But yeah, we recommend reaching out to people in the field. If you're not part of the FEES and MBS group on Facebook, it's a really great place to learn more about both FEES and MBS and hear perspectives. And then SIG13 is another great resource to just learn more in general about dysphagia, but also get some opinions about equipment. So with that, we're a little over time, but happy to hang out if anyone has any questions. I think I answered them all. Let's see. Oh, okay. It looks like Tim, you answered some of the questions.
I did, yeah, just sort of behind the scenes there. Oh, there's a few more.
Great, let's see. Oh, someone did ask about why we don't try to share scopes with ENT. So I can actually speak to this because in one of the hospitals I'm at, the SLP team is inside of otolaryngology, and we do share scopes with ENT. So, I think it's just really kind of specific to your setting. If you can get in with ENT and share in their budget, it's pretty amazing because they typically have bigger budgets than we do. And then as Tim mentioned earlier, in terms of the scope itself, ENT sometimes they don't use the pistol grip that a lot of SLPs do, which is no big deal. You can just learn how to scope like they do. You can also flip the image. So if you want to scope, if you learned, pistol grip style, you can flip the image and scope how you want. But yeah, we actually have had a question at one of my hospitals about sharing scopes with radiation oncology too. So, I think if you've got willing colleagues, totally do it. Let's see.
Shelby was asking about the Ambu, and an Ambu system that she has. And Yeah, Shelby, probably if you have an MBS, Tim's for MBS, the Ambu system won't just pop right onto that existing cart. We configured a different cart to accommodate that Ambu setup like you saw there. So, you could give us a shout and we can provide you with, all the information you need to make a decision on that one way or the other.
Yeah, and if you have any questions specific about, this course, the email is on the Tim's University website, but it's just tims-univ@tims.com. But yeah, Shelby, feel free to send us an email or contact us on our website and we can provide you with more assistance. The next question is, what is the Fees and MBS Facebook group name? Let me look real quick. I think it's just called Fees and MBS.
Fees and MBS,
I
possible.
think so. Let's see.
That'd be
Yeah,
a good choice.
it's an awesome group. It's run by Valeria. And she's up in New York, and that usually there are posts pretty much weekly. Let's see here. Fees and MBS discussion group is what it's called. And yeah, here, I don't know if you all can, no, you can't see that. I'm gonna see if I can show you. That's what it looks like if you want to join it. So you just, request to join. It's Fees and MBS discussion group. So they've got case studies in there for both Fees and MBS, and a lot of thought leaders internationally are in that group to share different perspectives, which is great. Yeah, Sarah, I think that was the same question. Awesome. Okay, well, if anybody else has questions that we did not answer, feel free to reach out. And like I mentioned, that survey link is on our website. It should be coming to you as well via email from Zoom. But if you don't get it or you need help, just send me an email at that Tim's email address and we will get it to you. And then the replay for this should be up on our website no later than tomorrow evening. We thank you all for joining us this evening, and I appreciate your time. Have a great evening.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.